Hello and welcome. Today we are going to study consonant sounds, manner and place of articulation of consonants.
Firstly, let us see what are the sounds in English. The articulatory process involves the coming together of speech sounds to produce sounds. There is no limit to the number of sounds which can result from such configurations. However, every language decides on the actual sounds that are significant and which can keep meaning apart. These sounds are called phonemes and are broadly divided into vowels and consonants. So basically, when we talk of vowels and consonants, we are talking about the sounds that are produced in a language. We have already seen that the speech sounds are broadly divided into categories, namely vowels and consonants. Let us see the distinction between these two. If we say the English word shoe, we realize that this word is made up of two sounds. One is represented by the letters sh and the other represented by the letters u. When we produce the sound represented by the letter sh slowly, we realize that during the production of this sound, the air escapes through the mouth with friction. On the other hand, we produce the sound represented by the letter u, the air escapes through the mouth freely and we do not hear any friction. The sound that is represented by the letters sh in the word shoe is a consonant, and the sound that is represented by the letters u in the word shoe is a vowel. All sounds during the production of which we hear friction are consonants, but not all consonants are produced with friction. Let us see more about consonants. So consonants are sounds in the production of which there is some form of obstruction to the flow of air as it passes from the larynx to either the lips or nostrils. If you look at this image here, you will see these are the lungs, and for production of any sound we throw the air out either through the oral cavity, that is through the mouth, or through the nasal cavity, that is through the nose. And if there is obstruction, there will be friction, and this is exactly what happens during the production of consonant sounds. There are 24 consonants in English and they are described based on the following parameters: manner of articulation and place of articulation, along with other parameters. So let us see them. To describe a consonant sound, we need to know the following details regarding its production. First is the airstream mechanism. Second, the state of glottis. Third, the position of the soft palate. Fourth, the active and the passive articulators. And finally, the structure involved. Let us see all of these.
Let us see the parameters which are used to describe consonant sound. First, the airstream mechanism. All English sounds, vowels as well as consonants are produced with a pulmonic egressive airstream mechanism. That is, the lung air is pushed out. Here, if you see in this image, these are the lungs, and to produce any sound, the air is pushed out either through the oral cavity or the nasal cavity to produce any sound. So that is the airstream mechanism. Second, the state of glottis. Speech sounds can be classified as voiceless or voiced depending upon whether the vocal cords are wide apart and the glottis is wide open, or vocal cords are kept loosely together and they vibrate. For example, here, this image at the bottom, this is glottis. It is situated in a throat. This is epiglottis, glottis, and these two are the vocal cords. When the glottis is open, that is when the vocal cords are apart from each other, there's a wide gap. At that time, the sound which is produced, it is called as voiceless. And when the vocal cords are kept loosely together, and hence they vibrate. Those sounds are called as voiced sounds. Third, the position of the soft palate. Speech sounds can be classified as oral or nasal depending upon whether the soft palate is raised so as to shut off the nasal passage of the air, or it is lowered to open the nasal passage of the air simultaneously with an oral closure. Sounds can also be nasalized. For example, here in this image you can see this is the soft palate. Here velum means the soft palate. Velum is another name for soft palate. If you raise this soft palate, it means you are shutting this nasal cavity like it is done here in this image. The soft palate is raised and nasal cavity is closed. The sound is passing through the oral cavity, and hence the sound which is produced when the air passes through the oral cavity is called as oral. But if the soft palate is lowered in order that the air can pass through the nose, that sound is called as nasal. And nasalized sounds are the sounds in which the air can be passed through both the oral cavity, that is through the mouth, and the nose simultaneously. Let's move on. Next is the active and the passive articulators. Any organs in the mouth or throat whose movement produce speech sounds are called as articulators. So here you can see a lot of organs. So any of these articulators or organs are called as articulators. Of the various articulators, at least two are required for the production of any speech sounds. Some articulators move during the production of speech sounds. They are called as active articulators. Certain other active articulators remain passive, and the active articulators move in the direction of these. These are termed as passive articulators. For example, when we talk, our lower lip and the tongue is used the most, and hence that is used most, and that move in direction of other passive articulators, and hence those are called as the active articulators. Whereas the upper lip, the teeth, and the entire roof of the mouth, it doesn't move while speaking. That is why that is called as passive articulator. So the organs which move or which are mobile are called as active articulators, and the articulators during the production of sound which are stable, which do not move, and the active articulator move in the direction of that organ, those organs are called as passive articulators. And the next one is the stricture involved. The term stricture refers to the way in which the passage of air is restricted by various organs of speech. Now, when we describe consonant, the stricture word is going to repeatedly come here. Stricture means the way in which the air is restricted. So this is the passage of air. Here air can be passed either through the oral cavity or the nasal cavity, and if it is obstructed, that is called as the stricture. Next, let us see the manner of articulation. It means the types of strictures involved. Using the parameter of manner of articulation, we can identify the following groups of consonants and their characteristic patterns of articulation. Okay, so the stricture, that is in which way the air is obstructed, that is the stricture. So the first one is plosives. Sounds produced with a stricture of complete closure and sudden release are called as plosives. Okay, the initial sounds in the English words pin, bin, tin, din, kin, and gun are plosives. So a stricture of complete closure and sudden release, for example, if you are producing this sound pin, what happens is both the lips come together, they restrict the air, and it is released suddenly and the sound is produced. Pin. Same is for bin, tin. Again, in case of tin, the tongue will touch the roof of the mouth, restrict the air and suddenly release. Same for din, kin, and when you are talking about this sound, gun, at that time the back of the tongue is raised. Here it is going to shut the air and complete closure is going to be here and sudden release, and the sound is going to be produced. Next is affricates. Sounds that are produced with a stricture of complete closure and slow release are called as affricates. So sounds which are produced with the complete closure and sudden release are plosives, but sounds that are produced with a stricture of complete closure and slow release are called affricates. The initial sounds in the English words chin and jam are affricate consonants. Here you can see this is the position of the mouth when you say ch, j. Okay, there is complete closure and a slow release. In case of plosives, there is sudden release. In case of affricates, there is slow release. So the air is obstructed and it is released slowly, and the initial sounds chin in the words chin and jam, that is ch and j, are affricates. Next is nasal sounds, which we have already discussed in one of our previous slides. Sounds that are articulated with a stricture of complete oral closure are called nasals. The final sounds in the English words sum, sun and sung are some examples of nasal consonants. Here, if in this image you see, this passage or the oral cavity is completely shut. The soft palate lowers in the direction of this oral cavity. It completely shuts or obstructs this cavity, and the air passes through the nose or the nasal cavity, only through the nose or the nasal cavity, and those sounds are called as nasals. For example, the final sounds in the English words sum, sun, sung are some examples of nasal consonants. Final sound as in m, n are nasals. Next is trills or rolled consonants. The soft palate is raised, thereby shutting off the nasal passage of the air. That is opposite of nasals. Here the soft palate is going to be raised. Earlier it was lowered. Now it is going to get raised and it is going to shut the nasal cavity, and the air is going to pass through the oral cavity. The air is going to pass only through the mouth. Okay. The active articulators strike against the passive articulators several times, with the result that the air escapes between the active and the passive articulators intermittently. These sounds are called trills or rolled consonants. The letter R in the English words like read and ran is produced as a trill by most Scottish people. Another example of a trill or a roll sound can be the sound which is produced by a kid when he is playing with his trucks or cars. He constantly do trrrr. So when we produce this sound, the active articulator, that is the tongue, is striking against the passive articulator repeatedly, and the air is constantly intermittently passing and the sound is produced. So the trrrr, the r sound in this sound, that is known as the trill or the rolled consonant. Next is taps or flaps. When the active articulator strikes against the passive articulators just once and then quickly flaps forward, such consonants are called as taps or flaps. The pronunciation of the sound represented by the double letter in American English Betty is an example of tap or a flap. So here The active articulator, that is the tongue, quickly strikes against the passive articulators and quickly flaps forward. So the double letter here is T, and in American English this Betty is pronounced as Betty. So it is quickly striking here and moving forward. Next is fricatives. The active articulator is brought so close to the passive articulator that there is a very narrow gap between them. Sounds that are articulated with a stricture of close approximation are called as fricatives. So, the active and passive articulators come close to each other and there is very narrow gap between them through which the air can pass. Such sounds are called as fricatives. So, let us see an example of such sounds. The initial sounds in the English words five, wine, thin, then, sip, zip, sheep, hat are fricatives. Here you can see in this image fur, were. The active and passive articulators, that is the teeth or the lips, are in close contact with each other, have come together, and there is a very narrow gap through which the air passes. Similarly, here when you say th, the tongue, the teeth and lips, they are coming together and there is a very narrow gap through which the air passes, and those sounds are called as fricatives. Next is laterals. Sounds that are articulated with a stricture of complete closure in the center of the vocal tract, but the air escaping along sides of the tongue without any friction are called laterals. The initial sounds in the English word love is a lateral. Come to this image. Here you can see the stricture of complete closure in the central of vocal tract, but the air escaping along sides. So here you can see the center of the mouth and the center of the vocal tract is closed or shut, but the air is passing through the sides. Such sounds are called as laterals. And the initial sound in the English word love, that is L, is a lateral. Here you can see central of the mouth and central of the vocal tract is shut and air is escaping through the sides. So L sound is an example of laterals. Next is approximants, which are also known as frictionless continuants or semivowels. The soft palate is raised, thereby shutting off the nasal passage of air. The active articulator is brought close to the passive articulator so that the gap between them is wide and the air will escape through this gap without any friction. Sounds that are articulated with a stricture of open approximation are called frictionless continuants and semivowels. The initial sounds in the English words yes and wet are an example of approximants. So here you can see this soft palate, it is raised. It is raised means it is going to shut off the nasal cavity or nasal passage of air, and the active and passive articulators are brought close so that the gap between them is wide and the air will pass through this gap. That is known as approximants, frictionless continuants or semivowels. The initial sounds in the English words yes and wet are an example of approximants. When you pronounce this word year, what happens is the tip and the blades of the tongue touch the roof of the mouth and the air escapes. There is a wide gap between them and the air escapes without any friction, or there is no obstruction. That is why the air escapes without any friction. Hence it is known as approximants or frictionless continuance or semi-vowels. Let's move on to the place of articulation. The place of articulation just means the two articulators involved in the production of a consonant. Consonants can be described according to their places of articulation. The label is used normally as an adjective derived from the name of the passive articulators. Here in this diagram you can see various names which are given as per the place of articulation. So let us see this in detail. First is bilabial. In this bilabial, here you can see the two lips are the articulators. The initial sounds in the English word pile, bile and miles are bilabial. So place of articulation means the places in the mouths which are used, or place of organs which are used. The bilabial sound means two lips are used. Which sounds are bilabial? The initial sounds like p, b, m, where both the lips come in close contact with each other. That is known as bilabial sounds. Next is labiodental. The active articulator is the lower lip and the passive articulators are upper front teeth. Here you can understand from the name itself, labio, that is lip, is also involved, and dental means teeth is also involved. So the initial sound in the English word fine and wine are labiodental. So f and v, in that case lower lip comes in contact with upper teeth and then the air passes and the sound is produced. Hence lips and teeth, the lower lip and the upper front teeth, both are used. That is why it is known as labiodental. Next is dental sound. The tip of the tongue is the active articulator and the upper front teeth are passive articulators. The initial sounds in the English words thin and then are some examples of dental sounds. So in case of labiodental, it was lip, lower lip and upper front teeth. In case of dental, it is the tip of the tongue and the upper front teeth. So the sounds like th, the, words like thin, then, and the initial sounds, that is th and the, are dental. Here the tip of the tongue touches the upper front teeth and then the air escapes. That sound is known as dental sound. Next is alveolar. The tip or the blades of the tongue is the active articulator and the teeth ridge is the passive articulator. As we know, teeth ridge or the alveolar ridge is the area exactly behind our teeth. That is also known as alveolar ridge or teeth ridge. So the sounds which are produced when our tongue touches this portion is called as alveolar sound. The initial sounds in the English words tin, din, near, sin, zip, love are an examples of alveolar sounds. For example, when you say t, d, n, s, z, l, in that case the tip of the tongue is touching this alveolar ridge or teeth ridge and hence the sound is known as alveolar. Next is post-alveolar. The tip of the tongue is the active articulator and the main part of the roof of mouth that lies immediately behind the teeth ridge is the passive articulator. Here the area which is behind the teeth ridge or alveolar ridge, this is the area, roof of the mouth. So the tip of the tongue is the active articulator and this roof of the mouth or this the portion behind the alveolar ridge is the passive articulators, and our tongue is going to go and touch this portion, and then the air is going to pass and the sound is going to be produced. For example, the sound represented by the letter R in the English word try and dry is an example of a post-alveolar sound. So when you pronounce these two words, try and dry, when you pronounce R sound, at that time the tip of the tongue comes in contact with this portion, the area exactly behind the alveolar ridge, this portion, it touches this part, and then the sound is produced. That sound is called as post-alveolar sound. Next is palato-alveolar sound. Here you can see palate, this is the hard palate, and when the tip of the tongue comes in contact with this hard palate and the air passes, the sound which is produced is known as palato-alveolar. So the tip of the tongue and the blades of the tongue or both can come in contact with this teeth ridge, is this teeth ridge, or the palate is the teeth ridge is the passive articulator. Simultaneously, this front part of the tongue is also raised in the direction of hard palate, and hence this sound is known as palato-alveolar. So let us see an example. The initial sounds in the English words like sheep, cheap and jeep are the sounds represented by the letter. In the English word leisure, the sound represented by the letter S in the English word leisure are an example of palato-alveolar sound. So when we produce the sound sh, ch, j, the tip of the tongue is touching the teeth ridge and the front of the tongue is touching the hard palate, and the sounds which are produced are known as palato-alveolar. Next is retroflex. The curled back tip of the tongue is the active articulator, and the hinder part of the teeth ridge or the hard palate is the passive articulator. We don't have any retroflex sounds in English as such, but there are few examples of retroflex in Devanagari. T, th, d, dh, n are some examples. What happens here is the tip of the tongue, it is going to curl back. Retro means to go back, so this tip of the tongue is going to curl back in which direction? The hard palate, this region. It is going to go back and touch this region, and then the sound is going to be produced. For example, t, th, d, dh and n. These sounds are called as retroflex. Next is palatal sound. The front of the tongue is active articulator here, and the hard palate is the passive articulator. The initial sounds in the English word yes is an example of palatal sound. So only the front of the tongue is going to touch this palate, that is palatal sound. An example is y, yes, yes, y. That sound, when this front of the tongue, not the tip, only the front of the tongue is going to touch this palate or hard palate, that is called as palatal sound. Next is velar sound. The back of the tongue is the active articulator, and the soft palate or the velar is the passive articulator. Soft palate is also known as velum. So the back of the tongue is an active articulator, and this soft palate is the passive articulators. So the sounds in English words back, bag and bang are some of the examples of velar sounds. What happens is when you produce these sounds, k, g, at that time this back of the tongue is raised and it goes in contact with the soft palate. It goes up, it comes in contact with the soft palate or the velum, and hence that sound is called as velar sound. Next is uvular. The rear part of the back of the tongue is the active articulator and uvula is the passive articulator. English has no uvular sounds. The initial sounds in the Urdu word meaning pen, that is kalam, ka, is an example of uvular sound. So the rear part of the tongue, it goes in contact with the uvula. Here this image doesn't have an label of uvula, but it is situated here. So the back of the tongue goes in the direction of that uvula and the sound is produced. We don't have any uvular sounds in English, but the Urdu word ka, kalam is an example of uvular sound. And finally, glottal. Glottal sounds are produced at the glottis, and the two vocal cords are the articulators. The initial sound in the English word hat is an example of a glottal sound. For example, the two vocal cords itself are the articulators, and the sound is, for example, h. You can try and produce all of these sounds practically to get more understanding. So when you produce this sound or when you pronounce this word h, hat, h sound, during the production of that h sound, the air is passing through the vocal cords, through the glottis. That is why that sound is called as glottal. So this is about the study of consonants. This is all about the study of consonants, the place of articulation and the manner of articulation, based on which the consonants are described, and we have already seen everything about it. These are the books which I have referred for this presentation. The pictures I have taken from these websites or the books, and the books which I have actually used as my references for the production of this video or this particular lecture. So I hope this is clear to you, and keep practicing, keep producing the sounds to get a clear idea about what is phonetics. You have to produce it, experience it, only then you understand or better understanding about phonetics. So that's it for now. Thank you all.